talking about the trial
Yes.
and pretty much the testimonies of everyone and what sounded like, I don't know what else to say. Hinsberger lied.
One could draw that conclusion.
One could draw that
That's not a
conclusion.
fact necessarily. He made a false statement.
He
That
made a
is
false
fact.
statement, so that's the fact. How did this ultimately impact you? Let's talk about the damages that all of this has cost you, and at least to what the finding of the preliminary trial was before we close today.
Well, the trial took place, as you know, in January and February of 2007. The opinion of the court was written in November of 2007. Now, at that point, the judge rejected all of HUD's arguments, sustained our arguments, and found HUD liable for breach of contract.
Okay.
They had breached the contract, and that had been determined 6 years later. 4 years after I filed the suit, 6 years after the breach of the contract.
They were found liable for breach.
And there was at that point two opinions, so if viewers want to actually read this in excruciating detail, there were two published opinions in the federal cases, not Federal Register, but in the court decisions, which are the basis for our American legal system. There are two published opinions by that point. And all of these things are described in great detail from Judge Horn, the author. And so that led us to finding liability. And then she said, why don't you people go away and see if you can agree on what damages should be? And I had taken the position that there were two types of damages. There was lost revenue, the revenue that we would have received if the contract had not been breached, and lost equity, the fact that we lost a building.
Right.
We lost a building that was worth $4 million of equity, and a building immediately to the south of us sold for $30,000 a unit, which would have been $9 million for South Point, or New England Terrace. So those were the damages that we had presented at trial, and HUD concluded that there was no damages. And not only that, but they shouldn't even be held liable. So they were talking to...
That was HUD's conclusion.
And that's HUD's position. I don't know if that's their conclusion. It seems hard to believe that any reasonable person would conclude that, but that was their position.
Especially if they've been found in breach.
Yes, they were liable for breach of contract. And the question was only damages at that point, and that took us another 3 years till 2010 to conclude. The judge concluded that there were lost revenues of $3.3 million, but there were not lost equity of $4 million, so that was her opinion. I thought that she had made several mistakes at that point, and we decided to appeal the amount of the damages. HUD then actually appealed whether or not there was any breach at all, or whether there were any damages at all. So that got involved from 2010 through today. And today we will be going back to HUD. We went to the Federal Circuit. Federal Circuit approved or affirmed that yes, there was a breach, HUD was liable, but why don't you go back and recalculate damages, and that's where we are as we sit here today.
I can't wait to hear what happens, and I'm sure the viewers won't either.
Well,
but I want to just backtrack a little bit.
I can't wait either.
I'm so sure.
My wife cannot wait more than anyone.
Yeah, this has to have been really difficult.
It's tremendous.
This must have been really...
You get a...
I can't imagine.
You have your entire financial security. It's like finding out that you're not getting Social Security.
Ooh.
You know, that puts a crimp in what you're doing with your life. And that's not... The human toll of this was amazing. I mean, I was actually a fairly decent person in terms of physical ability before I started this. But being hunched over a computer for half of the time for 7 years, I'm, as you know, walking with a walker at this point, with a cane, and I have a lot of collateral physical damage relating from doing this. But I am tenacious, and I think HUD's view is that if they keep it this long enough, I'll die. But I think that's not likely to happen, even though I have had cancer on 4 occasions, and a triple bypass surgery and a heart attack. There's all sorts of reasons to think I could, but I'm not going to.
What were the findings, in the face of all the false testimony? I I mean, that had to go somewhere. I'm really curious about.
Well, that'll be taken care of in the following way. In situations like this, when
But
HUD
what was the judge's finding in the trial, that, at least in the court case that you had? I mean,
Well,
where do we stand with that now? Where are we, when we're going
Well,
forward?
she just found that their testimony was not credible. She didn't find, by the way, that Hinsberger's testimony about the vouchers were false.
Not credible, not incredible.
Yeah, not credible. Those are code words for the judge to say not to be believed.
Not to be
I didn't
believed,
believe them.
Yeah.
Were they false? Yeah, that's another matter. Were they perjury? Yeah, that's for someone else to determine because that requires intent. But it's just that for purposes here, they didn't seem to be believable to me, so I am disregarding them.
Was that based on the witnesses?
Yes,
or
based on judges making determinations of witnesses. She looks at
Okay.
them like viewers looking at me right now and
Right.
saying, am I credible in that?
Okay.
Does it look like I'm telling the truth? Am I dodging? Am I shaking? No, they can. That's what judges do. They judge the temperament of the witnesses, their demeanor, their response, and they come to a conclusion. That's where. I'm sorry, I interrupted you though. You were asking another question. You were going another way.
I was just saying that's where we are today then. So that's where we are. We're going forward now. Has there been a date set for the upcoming, for the
Yes,
appeal?
I am, as we sit here right now, I've talked to the Justice Department and say, why don't we, as we were instructed to by the Federal Circuit, they can reduce the amount of the $3.3 million judgment to the extent that there's any savings that I realized. Well, I'm saying, how did their breach generate savings to me?
Yeah.
They received savings of not making $6 million in HAMP payments. I hardly received any savings. I mean, I had to meet all my operating costs. I had to meet my lender's obligation, or lose the building, which I did. So it's not that the lender said, Don, we're going to relieve you of paying our mortgage back. They say,
What a relief that must have been.
we're going to, since you're not paying your mortgage, we're taking the building.
Yeah.
So that would seem to me to be something that should be very easily resolved by the Department of Justice, meaning Douglas Mickle and myself, but there's not been any evidence that we've ever been able to do this in the past. But the other thing about this, there's one major legacy issue here, which is called EJA, the Equal Access to Justice Act. That provides that people like me, or small people, can get their legal fees paid if they prevail in the lawsuit, unless the Justice Department can prove, or HUD can prove, that their actions were not just reasonable, but sufficiently reasonable not to award legal fees to the successful plaintiff. That's a statutory amount, and if you calculate the statutory amount against my legal fees, it'll be $1 million that I should be earning under EJA. However, there's another provision that if there's bad faith by the government, that they will provide for those are statutory rates for $170 an hour for a lawyer, but if you show bad faith, the rates can increase to the marketplace rates of lawyers, meaning $600, $400, and $300. That's another $1 million. Now, what is bad faith? I think bad faith is going to relate to the activities they engaged in prior to the breach and during litigation. So that all of those things that we've enumerated today related to arguments about error, about amendment, about not correcting the defects, about the replacement contract, all those can be evidence of bad faith. Then the bad faith during the litigation could involve the testimony about at the district court. It could involve the testimony that was false by Hinsberger on the vouchers. It could involve the fact that they didn't provide the discovery of Freddie Batcher's laptop computer, or for the concurrences or electronic discovery.
So all of these are part of the appeal in
Those
essence.
will all be, not appeal, but these will be
argument.
bad faith, and they might involve another trial. So that.
Oh, so the appeal doesn't automatically mean that there will be another trial.
No, the EJA determination is something that can be agreed to, or the judge can just say, show us your billing records, and she can decide. Or it might be the question of bad faith is, did these things really happen? I mean,
Okay.
is it true that there were concurrences that HUD had that you didn't produce?
So that's the premise of the appeal, EJA?
It's not appeal, that's just another claim. In
Okay.
addition, we have the breach of contract that resulted in damages
All right.
that will be resolved by the Court of Federal Claims. Separate from that, there is the opportunity of making a claim for reimbursement of legal fees,
Okay.
which will involve the EJA law,
The EJA law, okay.
which at this point could be as much as $2 million.
All right then. Well, you have to make sure you stay tuned to find out what happens. I know, I cannot wait to see what happens. Thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
taking the time
Thank
to
you.
talk to me here. This has
Complicated
really been
discussion.
fascinating. It's very complex, and I have to say, I've learned a lot about the workings of a trial.
And the American legal system, and the behavior of government bureaucracy.
And I hope I never, ever have to.
Unfortunately, I thought there was change I could believe in, but it hasn't been proven to me so far.
Well, let's hope that that something will come of this.
Yes, Mr. President, I hope you enjoyed watching this section, so you can figure out how to get me to be one of your voters.
You've been watching Omnibus Roundtable. I'm your host, Renee Prejean-Motanky, and we've been talking to Don Samuelson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Stay tuned.